Okay, everyone, thanks for your patience and welcome to our very first Reaching Forward Fridays. My name is Tamara Jenkins. I am the Communication and Engagement Manager for ILA. Our presenter today is Becky Spratford. Becky is a reader's advisor in Illinois, specializing in serving patrons ages 13 and up. She trains library staff all over the world on how to match books with readers through the local public library. She runs the critically acclaimed RA training blog, RA for All. She is under contract to provide content for EDSCO's Novelist database. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
Novelist.
Novelist, sorry. And writes reviews for Booklist and a horror review column for Library Journal. Becky is also known for her work with horror readers as the author of the Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror, 2nd edition, and is currently hard at work on the 3rd edition. She is a proud member of the Horror Writers Association and currently serves as the association's secretary and organizer of their annual Librarians Day. You can follow Becky on Twitter at RA for All. Becky, the floor is yours now.
Okay, thanks. And Tam, if you could send the slide link over to people when you have a chance. Thanks everyone for coming. I cannot see what I look like for some reason, but you can see what I look like, so that's interesting. So I'll see how that goes. If I look funny, somebody tell me. So we're going to do OwnVoices for all readers, as I've been talking to everyone while we were getting ready. This is for anyone who does any sort of reader's advisory, whether you do it virtually or in person. These things stand, so I'll have lots of things for you to learn from this. If you go to RA for All, the website, the slides are available there and a link will be sent to you. So the slides are on Google Slides. They look like this. Some of you are on there. I'm going to do them in present mode right now for everyone. This presentation takes approximately 1 hour. I'm going to note the time. Okay, so we're starting at about 1:06. I will have plenty of time for questions. If you want to put your questions in the chat, Tamara can move them out and she's going to give them to me at the end. But please feel free to interact while I'm talking. I do not mind that at all. I'm getting notifications when there is a chat, but it's not interrupting my presentation. Okay, so this is OwnVoices for All Readers, incorporating equity, diversity, and inclusion values into our readers' advisory service at all levels. We only have about an hour to do this. This is a large topic. I understand that, okay? I'm going to sort of not beat around the bush. I'm going to tell you like it is. I'm going to give you lots of links in these slides. I'm not going to spend time going to those links today. There's a lot of heavy topics I'm going to talk about here, a lot of things to ponder and to take your time with. What I need to tell you is take your time, go through the presentation later, think about some things, go through some of the links. They lead to other links. Take some time to learn about these things. Use them as discussion topics with your coworkers. A lot of that we'll sort of walk through how to do that during this presentation, but I just want you to know that what we're going to do will make you feel a little uncomfortable, and that is the point. I am going to have us look at ourselves very closely and what we do. It may be uncomfortable with this hard look I'm giving everyone, but I promise you, I am not trying to be mean or accusatory. I'm using myself as a really big example in all of this. I'm using myself and the missteps I have made to show you what's going on. Anytime I call someone out, they have given me permission to call them out and to use them in this way. So just be aware of that. I also want you to remember that for my job, I travel the entire country. I have seen libraries in every region. I understand what's going on. I understand the administrative hurdles. I understand the personnel hurdles, and I'm going to discuss some of these, but I want to start with the sort of the thesis statement of this entire presentation, which is that the time for excuses is completely over for us when we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I want you to understand this because I have heard a lot of concerns, and then I propose action to people. They are paying me to propose action, and I get a lot of but, however, I can't do that because, I'm just going to give you some examples of the things I've heard. Nobody wants to read the diverse books we buy. 2, it's not my fault that most of the books published are by white men. 2, the accusatory, do you want me to just read every single classic? I go into library systems and I always include EDI as part of my talks. I always use a range of examples in the books I talk about with POC characters, with LGBTQ characters, with ability diverse characters, and also books with white straight males. I book talk them all equally. but I also challenge those in the room, and I don't let them get away with microaggressions when I'm there. Here's a recent example. About little less than a year ago, I was somewhere, and when I do my RA for All in-person talks where we do train staff how to book talk better and share the books they're reading, there was a point at which I was asking for examples. Everyone did like a sample book talk with a neighbor, and I was asking for people to volunteer to share what they shared. And a woman started talking about a book that featured Indians, and she said the characters are Indian. I said, okay, stop. I said, before we go any further, are they from India or are they Native Americans? And she went, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, they're Native Americans. Great. This is the example of things we're going to talk about. Checking ourselves and checking each other, but in a kind way. I'm going to bring out a lot more of these. But I also want to remind people that all of us are doing this, every single one of us, even the most well-meaning. I had to change a word in here recently. I was talking about white blindness, and somebody very nicely wrote me an email or said something to me on Twitter privately, very nicely, like, blindness is an abled term. So I changed it. And you'll see that later. I'll point it out. All of us do this. One of the words for the last year I've been trying to take out of my vocabulary is to use crazy as an adjective. I still slip up sometimes, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that all of us do this. At the very end of the presentation, I'm actually going to do a laundry list of things that I have done in the past that now look horrible to me, but you have to acknowledge it and move on. All of us, no matter how well-meaning you are, we've all done it. That's what I want to say. Okay, you also have the skills. You just have to learn how to sort of use them a little differently, putting EDI values at the forefront of everything you do, which that's the only new skill. And we're going to talk about ways to do that. So I'm going to give you examples, links, advice, just everything to show your commitment, not just tell people you're committed to serving patrons and representing all voices. One of the things that I did to sort of kick this off about a year ago, when I really started blatantly doing this, which we're going to talk about in a few slides, is I had a post, and you can go in there and look at that at your leisure, where I said that, we have to curate and promote diverse collections, and it's non-negotiable. And that's where this idea of this presentation sort of got kicked off by that post. And I talk about it a lot in there. So if you want to see sort of the impetus behind why all of this happened, you can read that. I'm going to address a lot of the issues in that post, though, as we go on. Okay, so I'm going to start with my journey. As I said, I'm going to use myself as an example, and some friends who've given me permission to share themselves, and we're going to talk about how I got to where I am beyond just that post I started you with. So we want to change our mindset, but also allow ourselves to admit we're part of the problem without blaming and shaming. Because there's no shaming here. As I said, we're all at fault, even people of color who are library workers. But none of us can rise above and reach a more inclusive service and environment without starting somewhere. Everyone's journey was going to be different, but today I'm going to hope to share how we get there. Now, let me just say this now. I'm going to mention it multiple times. The real hard truth is over 80% of librarianship are white ladies, okay? And you're welcome to all raise your hands if you identify as a white lady, but we are, and you don't need to raise your hands to do that. And I am, you saw my picture before, you see me now, I am a white lady. Like, that's one of the reasons why I started trying to speak from this front. I'll mention her later, but my friend Robin Bradford, who I was supposed to do a version of this program with at ALA, who is an African-American librarian and has seen this presentation and given it the thumbs up. She's somebody I go to regularly to do things. And she's always said to me, Becky, the librarianship, you look like librarianship. They will listen to you. They will do what you say. And that's been the case too when I go and give talks and there's like 2 or 3 people of color in the room, that they come up to me privately after email to tell me and thank me for the things I said, because when they say them, no one listens. So sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and be the messenger. But again, I can include myself. But here's something that woke me up into what I was doing. And sorry, allergies are also starting for me, so that's been a fun time. And it starts with my friend Annabelle Mortensen, who was also going to present with me on this topic at ALA. Maybe we'll bring it back next year. We'll see. We might be doing a virtual version of it in some way for RUSA. But this is when I really started understanding how bad the problem was. And I have a link to the Adult Reading Roundtable program we did about EDI in 2017 with Skokie Library, because they were really at the forefront of this. And Annabelle said something, and she gives me permission to share it because it shocked me. Annabelle identifies as a Cuban American, so let me back that up so you know that. And during this talk, she said something that literally will never leave me. She was at the time ordering for this. It's not a Lucky Day collection, but it's like a great reads collection at Skokie, and it's just books that they think their patrons really like, that they're ordering about 3 months out in multiple copies. And she was ordering for this collection at that time. And she said one time she was doing it and she was like, oh, wow, that's the second book by a woman from India that I've ordered for this month's, for whatever that month's collection was going to be. That seems like a lot. And she went, hold up. I just said that about women from India, but look at all the white men I put on the list every month. I never say that's too many white men. She said, and oh my gosh, even worse, I am a person of color. This is a problem. This is a big deal, and I think it's important for us to notice that even people of color do this internalized sort of bias that we have in our society. So then a little bit after that, I had a chance to actually act on this. I was asked to be on the guest of honor, the Lifetime Achievement Award, sorry, guest of honor, something different, committee for the Horror Writers Association's Stoker Con. And by the way, on April 18th, even though Stoker Con was canceled in England, we will be broadcasting the Bram Stoker Awards live on the Horror Writers YouTube channel. I will have information on the blog soon. It's going to be really fun. But this was when it was in Providence and in 2018. And I was on the Lifetime Achievement Award Committee, and we were going through and doing this. And I'm going to shout out Grady Hendrix, not because I'm name dropping that we're friends, but he is the reason that this happened. Because when push came to shove, I wouldn't pull the trigger and he would. We were on the committee together with other people, and we had it down to Linda Addison. And I can share to you the other finalist, Graham Masterton. I didn't used to be able to share that, but he was last year's guest of honor, so I can now share it. It came down to Linda Addison, who's a name you probably don't know very well, but she is an African-American horror, science fiction, fantasy poet, editor, short story writer, really famous within the community. But because she grew up poor and Black, it's really hard for those people to get a leg up in when it was all white men like Graham Masterton publishing. Graham Masterton and Linda Addison were on the list as the two finalists, and we were asked to vote in a closed vote if we wanted one or two finalists, and it had to be unanimous. And I tell Grady Hendrix this all the time. Good job, man, because I said, let's do two. Because I was like, how can I not give it to Graham Masterton? Everybody knows who he is. And I love Linda, and she's so integral, and people don't understand this, and she works so hard for the Horror Writers Association. And Grady said, no, we're doing one. And I said, I was the first to go on there then on the open vote. And I said, okay, then I'm voting for Linda. I said, I can't be somebody who fights for EDI values and not understand the implicit bias in our society that kept Linda down. And Graham will get it another time, I know, and he did get it the next year, and I was not on the committee that year. So that being said, the short version is, and I'll show you something else Linda does that really helps the EDI community later, but Linda not only won it, was so grateful. She's on the board with me for Horror Writers right now, but she also then started to see other writers associations start giving her Lifetime Achievement Awards. She was the Toastmaster for the World Fantasy Award. She was being flown out as a guest of honor in higher numbers than she ever had been before. It really only takes one person to take that step. And in this case, it was Grady to call us all out for us to do it. Start making things better. So that's the whole point I want to tell you, that we have to check ourselves regularly. Here's where I changed it from blindness to untrustworthy, because white privilege can be untrustworthy. We think about things, all of us in this world where white comes first, even if we are people of color or non-binary or whatever our identification is. I mean, my goodness, I'm a Jewish woman and I still default to Christian stuff all the time because that's what society does. So, okay, so here's what we're going to do today. This is a nonlinear approach because we have to do it nonlinear or we're not going to be able to get to it. So this is the way I'm going to tell you to attack the EDI issue and build a diverse house, a house being your collection, your services, everything. And this is the order I'm going to do it in. But you should do it in whatever order works best for you. And then these are also what I am laying out, my blueprints. You're going to make your own and create your strong EDI neighborhood and house and whatever you need to do for your library and your community. But this is what we're going to do. Let's get moving. Oop, I forgot it. I need to actually click. Okay. One of the things I'm going to tell everybody is the best place to start is with a mission statement, because that's where we begin everything we do in libraries. So I thought, well, that's where I should start with this, right? This is my own personal EDI statement for my company on your screen. And as you can see, this is what I give to people and make them sign before I go out to their libraries and do anything. And I'm really important for me, for my company, is that we allow all staff, and we're going to talk about why that's important for EDI in Reader's Advisory, and why we have to serve all populations, not just the ones most represented by our staff, because those are, or in the census, because those are things that come up a lot as excuses. And I'll address them all as we go on. But if you want to see my EDI statement and why I wrote it is at that post, and what made me do it. But the statement always lives on my website. And what was happening was I was seeing a lot of implicit racist things turning into explicit racist things. And it all came to a head at ALA Midwinter in 2019. And again, if you go to that explanation link in your free time, you can read the details. I'm not going to go through it. And I said, you know what? I'm always implicitly doing EDI in my talks. I got to stop. I got to be explicit. I've got to set the example. I have so many requests to use this EDI statement as a model for your own. Please do it. Just give me credit that you got the idea from me. I've had already 4 or 5 groups, no library yet, but a couple groups, like Reader's Advisory interest groups around the country, to use this as sort of their standard, and then they create one for themselves. This is a great way to start your entire EDI process, because if you set up a mission statement saying that you're going to focus on promoting own voices and diverse voices, if you say you're going to do that up front, it's a lot easier to do it, and it's a lot easier to do some of the things I'm going to tell you to do in the future. Just like in our libraries, when we make changes, we refer back to our mission statement, right? Does this support our mission? If you don't have an EDI mission statement, it's a lot harder to do this. So again, my journey is going to start with telling you to read diversely. But remember when I said you already have the basic Reader's Advisory skills to do this? It's just that we're simply going to apply them with a new purpose, with our new lens, our new EDI. Oops, I went the wrong way. Hold on one second. We're going to use this EDI mission statement as our lens that we're going to do everything through. That's the point, right? So now we're going to say all the things we normally do. Let's put this EDI lens in front of it. And one of the things that's in my 10 basic rules of Reader's Advisory Service, which this link will take you to, all 10 rules, one of my rules is to read widely. And I'm going to tell you, since I got my first Reader's Advisory job back in 2000, I was given a reading plan by my supervisor at the time, who was my director. I was supposed to make sure I read broadly. There was a marginalized voices aspect even back then. I had to read at least 3 books from what we were then calling a multicultural viewpoint. I'm going to address this term later as one of the missteps. And then we also had to include at least 1 LGBTQ book. Back then, now in my community, I worked at the Berwyn Public Library. It was a very strong and active gay community, so we were doing that anyway, but that was there. Now, my feelings have evolved in having this sort of minimum of 3 books and 1 LGBTQ book is not enough, I don't think, but that is foundational, reading widely. Now, here's the thing. You should make yourself a plan to consciously add own voices titles to your reading. I want to address that first before I address how many books we have to read, okay? So you need to make a plan and consciously add own voices titles to it. Well, how can we do that? There's a couple ways we can do it. You can get helps from others. So this link goes to the Goodreads page for all of the Book Riot reading challenges that they do over the year. And you don't have to do the one for this year, but there's great ideas on like things you can add to spice up your reading. This link here, make one for your library, goes to the Deerfield Public Library's Reading Without Boundaries that they won the ILA award for last year from the Adult Reading Roundtable, and ILA for best, or 2 years ago, for Best Reader's Advisory Program or Service. And it was for this program, and they're in year 2. They're also my example, and I have permission from Melissa from Deerfield to share this, of the fact that she said, you know, you say that little old white ladies won't read diverse books. Well, guess what? My little old white ladies are reading diverse books, and I'm allowed to share that. I once did that with her in the room, and she gave me a thumbs up too. So they are proof that this works and that people are reading more diversely when you give them examples and options. Now, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about how to give people those examples and options, but make a reading plan for your library, for yourself, so that you're adding these titles, okay? You should always be reading as broadly as you can anyway. And again, that EDI mission statement will guide you. Now, let's get to the complaints, because I'm going to address a lot of complaints today. The common complaint is, but I don't have time to read new EDI books. Here's the reason. I have to read my library's bestsellers, and they're very white. Okay, now, let's talk about sort of that building that house, right? And let's throw in a Field of Dreams reference, right? If we only read white books, we're going to build a white house, right? And we can't just, if you build it, they will come. We're going to get to that. We're going to provide other things. But if the house we're building is only white, when we go to bring people in, we're not going to be ready, right? So if we're only building a house of white books, we can't do this. So here's this thing called the internet, which all of you are on right now. And guess what? Reading about books can be done on the internet, and it's just as important as reading the books themselves. I have a much longer post about that you can read, but why don't you start by reading about the non-marginalized, or reading about the white bestseller books instead of reading them, and read the EDI books. Read the books by diverse voices, inclusive authors, OwnVoices authors. Do that. Then don't read Clive Cussler or James Patterson, whoever you think you have to read. You don't. Reading about those authors that are already bestsellers is plenty. I haven't read a James Patterson book in probably 12 years, maybe more. But I know all about James Patterson, right? That's the point. You can read all the journals are free right now. The Library Journal book list, you can read the reviews. Both the April issues of Library Journal and book list are available online for free. Read the reviews. Read what the people are saying about the books. Find all the bestsellers plus the other titles. And then read, actually cover to cover, the diverse books. The other thing you can do is to think like a reader and not a library worker. This is one of my overall guidelines for Readers Advisory in general. You don't have the time to read everything anyway, okay? It's something I tell people all the time, like, get over it now. You're never going to read all the books, and don't let that hold you back. We have enough things to be anxious about now. Let's not make our TBR piles one of them, right? If you read the reviews of books that you can't get to, that also helps you. So especially more OwnVoices titles, if you know you're not going to have time to read enough of them, if you go on Goodreads and read the 5-star and the 2-star reviews by people, you'll get a chance to see what people like and don't like about the books. And then you'll get a very good sense of the books. When you read the reviews, you're reading the professional version of it. When you're reading in like Booklist and Library Journal, but when you are on Novelist, but when you're reading the Goodreads, you're getting a reader review. And also, you want to be the role model at your library. You've taken this training, other coworkers haven't, right? Be a role model, and we're going to talk about ways now to share what we're doing. And the first way we can do it is to suggest diversely. Again, if we're a role model and only suggest books, I like to say I try to only suggest books that have EDI incorporated into them, are about, you know, OwnVoices, diverse. We'll talk about the OwnVoices term in a few minutes, but and why it could be problematic. But just diverse titles that represent a wide swath. I think it's important that those of us who believe in this go out of our way to do this. So first of all, just like you don't have to read every book, you know, to know what it's about, you can suggest books you haven't read. I'm sorry if this is a newsflash to you, but you can. It's not as shocking as many library tend to think, library people. You will not go to library jail. In fact, here's another newsflash. Your patrons don't actually care if you've read the book or not. Even when they asked you if you've read it, they just want to know somebody read it and somebody said something good about it to give them a chance to take it. You know, it's not enough to tell the people that the books are prepaid. They're not free, by the way. Do not tell people the books are free, especially now. Everything's prepaid. You are paying for these services. Please don't use the word free. Back to what I was saying though, you know, even though the books are prepaid, you don't have to have a money transaction at the library to take them home. People are still scared to take them home. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are saying, well, I didn't read it, but here's a 5-star review on Goodreads. Here's the novelist record. Here's all the great things that were said in the review journals about it. You know, provide them with, here's what a library reads person said. Provide them with information to help suggest the book. We use the words of others when we suggest books. We don't have to use our own words. And again, suggesting books you haven't read just means we're using resources, and resources are what we already use to help people. It's sort of, you know, the gold standard of librarianship. So let's not worry about that too. But the other thing I really want everyone to do, and I have done this with projects that I am involved with, specifically the Summer Scares program for the Horror Writers Association, which I was in meetings for all morning this morning. It is still going through, and we will have video content for you. But if you want to institute an own voices requirement on everything you do, what we did on Summer Scares, because we are working with Book Riot on that, is we used the Book Riot standard. That goes right there. Book Riot standard is 30%. They don't have the actual number on their site, but Kelly Jensen, one of their editors, gave me permission to share that number. And that is a link to their statement about how they make their lists. And basically what they do is they will not publish a list on the website unless it is 30% diverse voices. We're going to get back to why it's not own voices in 1 second. And at least 50% men and 50% women. We've instituted that on our Summer Scares lists. We have 9 titles, and I believe we have that would mean we have to have more than 50% of something. So we have, I believe, more women than men. And we have over 30% inclusion of own voices or of diverse titles. Own voices is not always the best word to use. It can be problematic, just so you know, because it requires the author identify. So I'm currently reading a book that will be in my June column for Library Journal called The Bright Lands. John Fram, I think, is the author. I just finished it yesterday. It's on my Goodreads shelf. He calls himself Stephen Queen. He markets himself this way. He does write like Stephen King, but he is gay, and the book has gay issues in it. But he identifies as gay. But there are sometimes books that are diverse. I think of authors like Paul Tremblay does an excellent job of, he's a white male, but provides diverse characters in his book. Cabin at the End of the World posits that the family that's going to save the world, and it won every horror and thriller award last year, is 2 gay guys and their daughter adopted from China who had a cleft palate, so came damaged. They address that and the bias of that. And they're the family that's going to save the world. In his brand new book that is really, it's very good. My star review is coming out in Booklist very soon, but it is about a pandemic, so just keep that in mind, called Survivor Song. It was excellent. It involves the 2 women as main characters. He's a man. One is a doctor, and she is Indian, from India, but English, Anglo-Indian. She's from England, but living in America. So anyway, we want to make sure those would be diverse, but not own voices. But there are many authors who write and then don't identify, and so you don't know if they're own voices or not. So just be careful with that. They have a 5-part series on also why to read diversely. We also, and this is so important, remember to audit all the ways we suggest our books. That is a brand new link right there. And actually, Jennifer from Indian Prairie is on the call. I know Jennifer, I mentioned Jennifer's library and their lists on this post. If you go back, I did this series of Stock Your RA Pantry while we're all not working with patrons, of things everyone can do. We want to audit the ways we suggest and go see if we're fulfilling these requirements. Are we suggesting 30% diverse titles? Are we making sure the men-women balance is there? Make sure we're doing that. And we want to do that in both the way we speak, but start with our lists that we already have published online. And if you go to that link, you can see a lot more from me about how to do that. We should be updating our lists anyway. We put them on there, and then sometimes they languish and they don't get updated. And I have a link to Indian Prairie and to Skokie, 2 libraries that are actively updating lists on a schedule and trying to incorporate diverse voices in those. But also in our catalog, like, make sure we're adding how we suggest. Let's not, I'm going to talk about this a little later, but discovery is a big issue, right? How patrons discover our books. We should have tags and keywords in the catalog, not racist LC subject headings, but like tags people would actually use. Like, you don't make an African-American author section, but you can put down something like culturally diverse or, African-American or something, so people who want to find those books can. And then finally, let's remember that diversity is not a genre, right? So if a book is by a gay author, that's not a genre, right? That guy I mentioned, the Brightlands author, yeah, he's gay, he identifies as gay, but he's a horror author. Like, the book is an homage to Bentley Little. He called his town Bentley. It reads like a Stephen King book. Like, this is not a gay book. It's a horror book with gay characters. So we want to make sure that we are not focusing on the diversity when we're suggesting books. I have this great newer video from Stephen Graham Jones, who is an Indian American horror author. He just won some award from his university where he teaches, and part of it was to give a 9-minute speech, and that is a link to it. And he talks about how being Indian is not a superpower. And it really addresses this whole issue of diversity and what he's asked to speak as all Indian Americans, and all he can speak about is his own experience. It is a great video to watch. It would be great training for staff to remind you that diversity is not the issue. The reason someone would read The Brightlands that I'm talking about, this book, is because they love Bentley Little, they love Stephen King. Anya Alborn is also another author. I think it's a lot alike. And they want to read that kind of horror novel. It happens to have a gay character, and it happens to have that as part of the frame of the story. What I like to say is when we're suggesting books, especially verbally or in written annotations, we don't want to always put the diversity angle first. Now, sometimes it's important to point out the diversity because there's people who are looking for that. I gave this talk in Raleigh-Durham in February, and an African-American author was challenging me to say, well, sometimes I want to let the Black folk know that, or African-American librarian, let the Black folk know that this book's about them. And I said, in that case, do that. We tailor all our annotations, all our speaking to our audiences, but we don't always have to make that the main thing we say. So for example, when we talk about There by Tommy Orange, we talk about that it's about the urban Native American experience. That's because it's really important, because for most people, they didn't even know there was a an urban Native American experience. But what I like to start off with that book is describe how it's a novel told as a mosaic with all these different voices taking their turns, telling their part, and how they're not necessarily even in the same plot lines, but they're all coming to the same place, a powwow in the Oakland Coliseum at the end. And then that clearly brings up that it's urban Native American, so I can bring that up. But if you talk about Underground Railroad, which is like my favorite book to book talk, because it's so easy, right? Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, you just say, imagine the Underground Railroad was an actual train that went underground. That tells you it's about slavery, it's about African-American experience, and it's about, and it's speculative, right? Because that didn't really happen. So it's an alternate history. But then there's a book like Tayari Jones's Silver Sparrow, which has been one of my favorites for years for my book clubs, and I would suggest it a lot. And it's even better to suggest now after An American Marriage was so popular. What I say about that book always when I book talked it is I didn't bring up that the characters were African American because that wasn't the appeal. When my ladies read this, in fact, I don't think they knew that at the start, but Silver Sparrow is set in suburban Atlanta in the 1980s, and it's the story with the point of view of two half sisters. They have the same father. One of them knows about the father's existence and the other one does not. And there you go. And that's what it's a story about. They just happen to be African-American characters. Okay, that's how we suggest diversely and how we think about it. And let me go to, okay, now we're going to collect diversely. Obviously, we need to buy books by OwnVoices authors, by diverse authors. Yes, the main obstacle is that publishing is too white. I have much to say about that throughout this presentation. There are links to that. This goes to a link I talked at length about American Dirt. I talked about ways to use the controversy to educate people. And we talk in there, I talk about some of the problems about publishing being too white. I have a link later to the Lee and Low Publishing Industry Survey also. But part of the problem is publishing is too white. We're not going to solve that problem overnight. The good news is the publishers are on to this and they understand they have to do better. So they're starting to promote their diverse titles with more regularity and include them in their book buzzes and all of those things that they're doing. But when we're doing our collections, we have to be adding books and really trying to add, and our goal should be to, from now on, not previously, not go back and get rid of everything, although weeding is important. We want to be adding books at sort of those ratios, like 30% of our collection. It should be our goal in the next so many years to get 30% of our collection to represent a more diverse pool of voices. So where do we go for that? The small presses are doing a great job there. There are obviously specific presses that do LGBTQ. I have a review I just turned in from Lethe Press, which is an LGBTQ press, of a horror book about a retelling of the resurrection as a gay love story, buddy journey. It's amazing. It's 4 stars for me. I just turned the review into Booklist. It'll be there. On Twitter, I posted the first line of my review, and I said, if you don't want to read this, something's wrong with you, because it sounds awesome. So there's an example of a press that does a really good job. But small presses in general tend to take more of a chance on less traditional authors, right? Also, we have to consider self-publishing because it isn't as stigmatized anymore, but it's really hard to find those books. We're going to talk about how to identify the better books in a second. But genre titles are also a place to look from both the major presses and the small presses. You see the diversification coming faster in genre presses. You see it especially in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. They've been doing well for years because they were called out a bunch of years ago. We're starting now to see it in the romance industry, especially with African-American and gay and lesbian romances and non-binary. Hopefully it'll trickle down into more. I haven't really seen a lot of Hispanic. I've seen a couple over the years, and some East Asian we're getting, but we're going to see more. They're doing really well. Mysteries are also doing well and have done well for a while, especially because a lot of historical based. I do a whole talk on all the genres, and I point out in that presentation I show over 100 titles, and I think 60 at least in that presentation are OwnVoices or diverse titles, and I'm only picking the most current award winners and the most current sort of critical darlings every time I do that. So that's showing you that it's definitely changing. It's just that our collections aren't necessarily keeping pace. Let me just skip down for a minute, because when we look at genre titles, also writers associations are working really hard. The Sears table is something that Linda Addison, who I mentioned before, runs. It's available on the Horror Writers website every month, where people from the Diverse Works Inclusion Committee include books by women, LGBTQ plus people, and POC and diverse horror authors, that they spotlight one every single month, and there's like 3 authors spotlighting them. They get a chance to hear about the authors. We write about the authors for our members. Libraries can use it too. I promote it to libraries, and you get to see like a start with title for those authors. We started this when Linda was upset years ago that our nominee lists were very white. She would end up on them a lot, but she was one of the only people of color represented. And since we've done that, our lists have not just winners, but our nominees have become some of the most diverse in all of the communities, where we've avoided the problems that the science fiction and fantasy and romance writers have had, because our members took it upon themselves to educate, because she found that that was the biggest thing. People didn't know who to read. So we're going to tell you who's out there that's good that you might not have heard about, because they're in these smaller publishers, or they're self-publishing, or whatever it is. But one way to identify resources for small presses and self-published books is to go to Amazon bestseller lists. This link goes to all their bestseller lists, but my best example for this, or 2 areas I get asked about the most, are urban fiction and Christian fiction. So let's do the urban fiction. One of the things I do for urban fiction is I find titles that I know are working, or I find titles that are already on the bestseller list, because they have those uber specific bestseller lists. So like #1 in, romance, urban fiction, whatever you go through to get to. And I look at like the top 10, and I tell people, and it's worked really well for libraries who've done this, look at the publishers and maybe go see what else they're publishing. Look at the customer reviews, go to Goodreads and look at the reviews. Again, we want to ask patrons, readers, and fans what they're reading. And so the first way to get to it is we can ask our patrons, we know who are reading it, but the readers and fans are going to be on Goodreads or are going to be on Amazon leaving comments and reviews. So we can actually take those reviews as sort of comments from fans and see what else is it like, what other authors does it remind them of, and then look at those authors. So we just keep going, and we use the Amazon pages because that's where the hardcore readers are for the bestsellers, and build back from there. So that's how you can do that. And that's just a really easy way to start collecting diversely. It is definitely not the whole way to do it, but we want to keep that EDI lens of our mission statement in our minds when we are collecting, and make sure we're auditing to see, are our orders representing the goals that our mission statement puts out. Oh, it's my favorite slide. It's time for my favorite slide. I'm going to do sort of an interlude here. The interlude is we're going to talk about a larger issue that we're all creating. And some of it is because we're being well-meaning. Lots of these have longer, much longer. Every link on here goes to something I've written about this topic. But let me just talk about it for a moment. The problem is completely illustrated by the GIF that I have included. We are basically putting out one fire and starting another and creating this vicious loop, where we're not creating read-alike lists that are helping the EDI problem. Okay, let me begin with talking about Stephen King as a great example. Stephen King is a best-selling author. It's shocking, right? Everybody loves, quote unquote, loves Stephen King. Almost everyone in America at least knows about Stephen King. Most people, especially if they're hardcore readers, have read a Stephen King book because they're an excellent place for advanced readers to begin when they're younger. For some reason, you only would find other white males being recommended for Stephen King, despite the fact that if you tell people, oh, what, you know, do you like horror? No, I don't like horror at all. Who's your favorite author? Stephen King. I mean, that's an answer I've gotten from people. Stephen King is the epitome of a bestseller. And one of the reasons why bestsellers are a genre, because, you know, everybody reads him, of all walks of life, of everything. But if you break down why people like him, and I have a whole post where I talk about it, it's not just horror and it's not just white dudes. There are women, there are people of color, there are science fiction, fantasy, horror writers who write like Stephen King, who use these flawed characters trying to make better. They use this, the character-centered, the really good frame, the heightened suspense, all these things he does. And I talk about it in the post. And I made a whole list of authors who write like that. Like I said, men and women, LGBTQ, every color of the rainbow, whatever it is, right? So you can see that. But this really came to a head for me many years ago. I actually can't remember when this, I could click through, but then we'd have to backtrack. You can. It was a bunch of years ago when I put up this Luis Alberto Urrea rant. A bunch of years ago, I had the chance to interview Luis Alberto Urrea as part of the Fox Valley Community Reads. I don't know if any of you were part of that live on stage. And I got to work with him for a couple weeks before that, lots and lots of phone calls and preparation. And he's just a wonderful man. He is one of those Mexican-American authors who's sort of risen above, right? He's considered, he wins the Pulitzer Prize. He has won that for his journalism. He's been a National Book Award finalist. Into the Beautiful North has been one of the big read books forever. He's sort of an approved Mexican author, right? Well, I did this giant rant, and again, you can read it, about the problem I see when we make read-alikes for people of color that are authors. We either, one, think we're elevating them by giving them a white read-alike, which Celeste Ng has also talked about at length on Twitter. So like, oh, you're so good, now you get white read-alikes only, other National Book Award finalists. Or conversely, people only give Luis Alberto Urrea Mexican American or Mexican author read-alikes. Now, of course, some of those works. One of the best read-alikes for Into the Beautiful North is A Prayer for the Stolen by Jennifer Clements, and I talk about it in that post, and it is set in Mexico. But here's the thing, and I talk about it in the post, so I'll give you the spoiler, but you can read about why. The author, I feel like, if you really take it on appeal and don't take their diversity as an appeal factor, if you take it on its own, the author that Luis Alberto Urrea most writes like is Louise Erdrich, who's identifies as Native American, and writes books with Native American authors. And I've never had anybody come back and say no. I've had people try that or see that, and it has to do with the way they write. And again, you can read that in the post. I'm not going to go through it all for you if you want to see why, but that's why this is wrong. Okay, so then what happens is if we're only giving Mexican or white read-alikes for someone like Luis Alberto Urrea, we're creating faulty lists that sort of perpetuate this, that white is the standard. Also, let's take it a step further, and this is my post about read-alikes for David Baldacci, which I got from a person after I did this training at their library. She said, I can't find read-alikes for David Baldacci that aren't white. And then that came up a whole new issue. And I actually ran this by my friend Karen Toonan at Naperville to test this theory. So David Baldacci writes thrillers, right? He does not write in literary thrillers. He writes regular, plain old boring thrillers. When you search for thriller writers that are similar to David Baldacci in our regular resources, you get a lot of other white dudes. Once in a while a lady, but a lot of other white dudes. But if you dig further, and I did this and I explained it, you find some authors who are described as literary thrillers. But when you look at their books, and I list the authors there in the post, you find that that's not literary. I hate using that term anyway, because it says that the other ones are less worthy, because they're just thrillers. And here's the problem. When we have a genre that is less elevated in general, like a thriller, you think you elevate it by putting the term literary in front of it. And if it's a POC, then it's elevated. But what happens is you find that people who just want a plain old boring thriller, like my friend Karen at Naperville, she's like, oh, I avoided anything that said literary thriller. I don't want it to be literary. I want it to be a good old trashy thriller, because that's what she wants. She wouldn't have read those. And now she's tried some of them and she's like, oh, they're really good. They're not literary. That is reverse racism doing that. This is how we're unintentionally creating, oop, it says racist. I should say racist. I didn't even notice that. I will fix that. Racist resources that are just not helping the problem. They're creating this problem that the dinosaur is experiencing on the screen right now. So discoverability is key. People aren't going to be able to discover books if we're hiding the implicit racism of them. Here's the thing. In that review of the 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, which is by a white woman, but it's about immigrant literature, I talk about providing read-alikes, about women that are immigrants from all areas of the world. The fact is you need to commit to never only having straight white males as an option on anything that you do read-alikes. If you're making a read-alike list, audit it to be 30% diverse and 50% men and women. But also, when I do read-alikes for Library Journal or my book list reviews, you will never, since the last 2 years, in the last year and a half, you will never only find white male read-alikes for any author. It won't happen, and I will not allow it to be printed that way, and my editors know not to cut one out, and if they do, cut the white dude out. It's important that we are elevating all voices. Okay. I mentioned this before that I was going to bring this up. I'm just going to talk quickly about the fact that the more voices we include in our Reader's Advisory services, the more diverse it will be organically, okay? And diverse by all size standards. We'll have different genres represented. We'll have different points of view represented because our support staff are more diverse than our 88% white lady status. You see that. I saw that at my library. The librarians were 88% white, but the library staff where I worked at Berwyn were majority minority, right? But, you know, it was poo-pooed for them to participate in like staff rec shelves and all this. No, it shouldn't be. You know, I changed that obviously when I was in charge, but that's how it was before. Because working together is our most valuable resource. That's one of my standard rules of Reader's Advisory. Every single person on the library who works at the library, from the page to the director, can participate in some way in Reader's Advisory. I have a step-by-step guide on how they can all book talk. I have this making it easier for staff to participate in staff recommendation shelves. If everyone gets a Goodreads account, and in fact, earlier this week, if you use the link earlier I had that went to a post on Stock Your RA Pantry, if you just go on my blog and look at recent things, how to set up a Goodreads shelf. In fact, I'll go back and add the link to your guys' presentation as soon as we're done. So when you see the slide, you'll have the link to my recent post about how everyone should get a Goodreads shelf with their work account. But really, you should be letting people post their favorite books, and they don't even have to put anything down. Just give it, if they give it 5 stars, you can use it for your staff rec shelf. And I talk about how to make it easier for everyone to participate if you get those shelves on this post. And I'll add that link about how to do it a little bit better after this. But just remember, this is not just you, the person taking the presentation. If we include more staff, we're going to get more organic diversity. You might need to be adding the diversity that's lacking, but you're going to see across the board, both from formats and types of topics of the books and the genres of the books, it's going to be better. Okay, this is a reminder slide, and then we're going to do a few final topics. Again, we started at 1:06, so we have about 15 minutes left, and then I'll take questions. But while I take a little breath, I also want to remind you to start putting your questions in there so we can see them and deal with them in the future. Okay, you want to make incorporating own voices titles part of your everyday work. We talked about this, right? You want to make sure you're book talking them. You want to make sure you're suggesting them. You want to make sure you're including them on your lists. Everything you do should be that way. If you're making mistakes, fix them. Again, I have that post that we had earlier that linked to how to fix your lists. We also want to improve discovery. That goes to a much longer post that I alluded to before, which is all about a library who said, look, they want me to make little sections, and I don't really want to do that. I don't want to ghettoize the book. So she said, like, they want me to have an African-American section. And I said, well, here's how you stop them. Are you putting Toni Morrison in that section? And she said, no. I said, then it's not okay. Like, it's not okay. Because you wouldn't put Toni Morrison not in the general collection, right? So it's fine if you want to do an urban fiction collection, like if you have a pull-out romance collection, there's nothing wrong with that. But even that I say don't do, because serendipity of finding things on the shelf is one of the ways people discover new books on their own. It's extremely great form of passive reader's advisory, especially if you add shelf talkers along the way about interesting books. But the best way we can improve discovery is to take advantage of our online public access catalogs, of our internet catalogs. How? There is the ability now to add as many keywords as you want. We are not going to go to library jail by not using approved subject headings, because every OPAC allows keywords to be added. Add the terms your patrons are searching for. Are they searching for LGBTQ+? Don't make an LGBTQ section. Don't even put stickers on the books. Put that in there, so that way people who want to find those books and they don't want to ask for help, especially with LGBTQ, put a link there so they can pull them all up. I like to explain how this works by using a non-racial sexuality example, so that I kind of take the EDI and the feelings out of it. One second. And yes, I'm drinking a whole bottle of San Pellegrino, because why not, right? Okay, so here, I'm gonna take this out. So take a library who decided to pull out their nonfiction DVDs. It was a space issue, right? They pulled them out of their DVD section and interfiled them by call number, because they already had call numbers on them, into their regular collection. Well, of course, there were people that were upset about this, that the nonfiction videos were unavailable in the video section, right? We're gonna talk about how you find those for those people, but let's go back to the positive. When school kids are coming in for school to do a World War II project, when they go to the shelf with the World War II books, you know, the 945 books, they're going to have videos too. Here's an even more, that makes more sense, reason to do it. If you're a library, because I know a lot of them here in the Chicago suburbs, which is a lot of you right now, have really popular Rick Steves travel collections, books and videos, right? He's super popular. People love it for armchair travel as much as they do if they're going. But if you have the Rick Steves videos with the videos and the books with the books, there are patrons that don't know you have the other. And I know this because when the library did this, people were like, wait, you have the video? When they went to the book, or when they got to the book, they went, hey, you have the video? Duh, shouldn't they be together? Doesn't that make more sense than ghettoizing them by format? That's what we're talking about. We talk about discovery. But adding discovery to the OPAC allows those people who used to browse just the video collection to be able to pull them all up, because you can pull up travel, right? Or you can have a keyword for, you know, nonfiction and format DVD, right? You can pick a keyword that does that. People can limit. You can teach them to do it. You can, for a while, this library actually printed out the results for all of their videos that had been moved. So somebody, an older patron, could actually browse through it, you know, flipping through paper. There are ways to do it and improve discovery for everyone. Here's the point I've been saying the whole time, though. We want to lead by example. You guys are your leaders in EDI at your libraries. You are the ones that need to push this forward. You are the ones that need to point it out. You are the ones that need to set the example. Inspire others to improve with your behavior. Make sure that you, oh, this used to have a link. Maybe it's on the next page. Oh, it is on the next page. Politely correct people when they have microaggressions. When your colleagues use terms like Indian to mean Native American, or they say things like, you know, blind, or, you know, say things like disabled instead of using, you know, abled versus able-bodied versus non-abled. But, you know, when they use things like crazy, like, just call people out. I'm going to show some terms that I use that shouldn't be used anymore in a few minutes. And I'm going to politely correct myself to give you an example. The whole point is to inspire others. Talk about your own struggles after taking this talk. Maybe on your next Zoom meeting with your whole staff, say, hey, here's some things I learned from taking this webinar. Here's some behaviors I have done. Start with yourself. Use yourself. Don't be a white savior, though, and go there and be like, I know how to talk about EDI now, and because you're not. It's a process, and you have to constantly check yourself and check in with the people that, especially people you trust, and who are from these marginalized groups, to help you. Okay, so let's keep going. I know I've done a lot of doing everything you need to do, and going with not being a white savior is to listen. When I talk about Reader's Advisory, when I do trainings in person, I talk about how 60% of it is listening. It's not the doing, it's the listening and the understanding and making sure we hear everybody. You want to make sure that you shut your mouth and make room for marginalized voices, and don't be that white savior. I have a much longer post, which is actually a review of my friend Larissa Glasser, who is a transgendered librarian archivist in New York. actually, I think she's living in Boston now, but she's from New York. And it's her great, super awesome trans bizarro novel, and it's a huge review. But in it, I also talk about my meeting Larissa and how I became friends with her. And it was all because I watched African-American award-winning horror author Victor Laval on a panel with her about marginalized voices in horror. I watched him stop and listen to her when she was answering. And at that time, she had one book. It had a lot of critical acclaim. People didn't really know her. And he didn't have to give her the time of day. He was already famous, right? But he did. And he listened to her. And then when she was done, he said, everything she said, she covered it. And I was really listening to her. And I got enthralled by watching him listen to her. And in the meantime, we become friends. She's a librarian. We talk frequently. And I think that we need to make sure we're taking that time to listen. I talk about how that book taught me so much. I read it with Urban Dictionary open to learn a lot of terms. Larissa sent me the names of other authors that I included as read-alikes that are great trans authors, better than her, she says. But this is a super fun romp. It's like an adult version of Scott Westerfeld's Leviathan, only with a little bit of like Lovecraftian and a lot of actually, not appropriate necessarily for teens, no matter sex, no matter who was having the sex, it's not appropriate for middle grade kids who are reading Leviathan. Okay, these are the places where I've misstepped, and they came from me listening, okay? These are my examples. Again, you can use these to show people how you correct it. I used to use the term multicultural. I talked to you about that. We used that as our term. Like basically it meant anything that wasn't white. All right, well, let's talk about the problems with this. One, it sets up white as the standard and everything else is other. But also at an ILA conference a couple of years ago, the Adult Reading Roundtable, I moderated a panel for them, and Sonali Dev was on the panel. And in her talk that she gave, she talked about reading. She's, if you don't know, she's Indian American. She lives in Naperville, great friend of libraries. She was giving her talk. She said, I was reading a review of my book in one of her earlier books in the New York Times. And in that book, they said, in the review, they said, she writes about multicultural romance. And she went, oh, wait, what? New York Times, she said, I was talking back to my newspaper. There's nothing multi about the culture in my book. This book is all Indians in India falling in love. Now, she has since had multicultural stories, which she talked about even then, like I do now, but that book that they were reviewing was not multi, it was just cultural, it was just Indian. So that word just needs to go for the thing. At the Berwyn Library, I mentioned how we were extremely supported by our large LGBTQ community. Always, Berwyn has been a leader in that in a long time. And with the help of that LGBT community, with them helping to pick them, we use stickers that said alternative lifestyles on all our LGBTQ books. You can imagine how that makes your mouth feel now. It's a bad taste, right? But at the time, again, it is completely untrustworthy, this privilege of being, heterosexual, white, whatever it is that you're not, even our gay, our LGBTQ group, they were called Bungalow, helped pick those stickers. Like, it's blinding. It really is. And I hate using blinding. So again, I'm going to use untrustworthy. It's untrustworthy. Don't trust yourself to make those choices. Alternative lifestyles is clearly not a good choice because it says that there's a lifestyle that is in opposition to the alternative, which is the standard. We talked a little bit about not interfiling POC and LGBTQ authors. People do that. I've done that in the past with some things, not as much, not by race so much, but by genre, and have since. When I first came to Berwyn Library, we interfiled Western, for example. It was on a different floor, which was just a disaster. And then also one time in a meeting, I learned about fonts. Again, I'm going to use Karen as an example. She was the one that brought it up. We were doing something for the Adult Reading Roundtable, and it was many years ago, and she stopped a meeting and she said, wait, can I ask a question before we move on? Is there a reason we're using X font? I think it was Times New Roman. And someone said, no. She said, okay, can we use Arial? And someone said, okay. And she said, because I'm dyslexic and, that font is easier to read. And I said, okay, wait, we're stopping this meeting. I want to hear more about this, because I said, can you talk about that more? And I didn't know that was a problem with fonts. So if you notice, I use fonts that are easy to read in my presentations. On my blog, I use a very dyslexic friendly font, and obviously anyone can make their screen bigger or smaller as they want because it's on the screen. And I have been told by Karen that you can do there's like a dyslexic open font that people can apply. Because it's on Google, there is a plugin to do that. That's another reason why my blog is on Google, so I don't have to develop scripts and things. There's a post here too. Remember, we need to listen and not be, where was it? What did I say it was? White Savior. This is by April Hathcock, who is the reason I started everything. If you read about what happened at Midwinter a couple years ago in the first post, where she talks about the number of trainings she's had to go to where people's white fragility is like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. I feel so bad. And people spend all this time talking like that. That doesn't help. Like, again, admit when you've misstepped, move on, pledge to do better. We want to listen and learn and not react and not talk about, oh my God, and make it all about us, okay? So please don't do that. Okay, as we're finishing up, again, type in your questions if you have them, because I'm just about done. I believe this is the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, it is, so that's good. Oops, no, you got to see the doggies too early. Okay, I want to remind everybody, this is a marathon. It is not a sprint, okay? We need to work to get through this one step at a time. I gave you many, many, many examples with links. You have some time now. Spend some time looking into these things. Think about how you're going to address the situation. Where are you going to start? You know, you can actually do a diversity audit of your collection from home. You can do that. You can pull up what you have. You can take a look. You can do limits, you know, with the regular search functions, even if you only have public OPEC access from home, and see, like, let's take a look at all our horror books. Where are we missing, you know, people of color? Where should we be adding tags? Like, what do we have under Victor Laval? Do we have anything if people want to discover him? Do we have anything on Stephen Graham Jones? He has a brand new book coming out in May. It's going to be extremely popular, The Only Good Indians. Do we have tags for that? How are people going to find these books? You can do that. But here's why we have to do it. This, your work and collections need to represent the world at large is the main thesis point. That goes to a much longer post that I've written about this topic that refers to a post called Whiteness as Collections. I'm going to be reading this so I don't get it wrong, by an author, an academic librarian, Sophia Luang, and I talk about it and I link to her article there. Let me just read a little bit from this larger post because it says it so well. And I was responding to people being upset at her for calling out the fact that our collections at academic libraries are way too white Western perspective. Our collections at every library are way out of proportion. This is me speaking. Our amount of materials written by and from the white male perspective greatly outnumber everything else. We should be striving to bring our collections into proportion with the racial and gender mixes of our country. Our collections should represent us as a people, and as we shift and change, so too should our collections. Why are people upset with a completely rational and well-founded argument? Let me pause. She was getting attacked, obviously, as you can imagine, a lot. And I referred to some of those attacks. Okay, I know it's because white people feel threatened by the fact that people of color are actively speaking up about injustice that they have known and fought their whole life, often without bringing up to the wider public discourse. An injustice that white people haven't even noticed because we just made everything white as the standard and never considered how that affects those who don't fit our standard. Now, I want everyone to do this right now. Every one of you, especially those of you who are white. If you're not white, you're going to have fun doing this. But if you're white, this is going to be your first eye-opening. If you're not, or you're not able-bodied or straight or whatever it is, you're going to know what I'm saying. But everybody who identifies sort of as what we think of as a default, which is wrong, please listen. Imagine yourself as a white person, because face it, most of you are, had only ever been in a library where the vast majority of scholarship and leisure reading was built on a non-white perspective. Because that's the issue that every person who is not white, heteronormative, or able-bodied deals with every single time they are in our libraries or use them for research. Think about yourself. You would hate it. Just the knowledge that this is what is surrounding you would make you feel unwelcome. Of course you would feel like the world was against you. It is a deeper issue than many of us can imagine. Our entire amassed and cataloged knowledge as humanity is built off of almost a single monolithic viewpoint. And instead of trying to recalibrate it, people are becoming upset and attacking the messenger. They're saying things to her like, what, do you want me to burn all my classics? Do you want me to get rid of all my collection and only put in people that aren't white? That's not what we should be doing. As a profession, we need to act. You should be angry that this imbalance has persisted for so long. You should use your energy to make our collections better. And let's all start with ourselves. Let's set the example, right? I lost my place. Okay, because while you may be located in one place, your patrons are citizens of this country and our world, and they need to see its wonderful breadth reflected in our collections. Everyone needs to read books about everyone. We need to start recalibrating our collections. We need to stop being mad that people are calling attention to the problem and start being part of the solution. Now, please, just because you've taken this talk and you've heard my message, don't think your work is done. This is that link to the Lee and Lowe survey that shows how overwhelmingly white publishing and the review people are. Again, I am a big reviewer and I am a white lady. I am very careful to provide alternate viewpoints. And when I build my columns for Library Journal in particular, because I am allowed to do multiple books at once, I try very hard to represent as many voices as I can. And react appropriately when questioned. I talked about what OwnVoices means, so I think that's important. We want to make sure we read, suggest, promote, and collect with an EDI lens, and then repeat it over and over and over again. Now it's time for questions. Tam, you can come in, but while you're gathering those, I remind you that the slides are on RA for All. You can email me at any time with your questions. Sometimes, like the David Baldacci issue, someone emails me a question and I ask if it's okay to answer it online. And I don't identify you and your question. In her case, I definitely couldn't identify her because she was having some issues at her work where they were microaggressing her as a person of color. But I did address that in the talk, and you can always interact with me on Twitter at RA for All. And again, the slides are there, and hopefully Tam sent them to you.
I put them, hi, this is Tamara. I just put the slides in the link so everyone can access those. And we have our first question from Emma Andrews. She stated that if I might mention something, you used the word transgender. This is not a word that many of us are comfortable with because we are not in action, especially past tense. We simply are. We would not refer to a Christian as Christians.
You're right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I usually just say, I see this question. I usually just say transgender, and I'm sorry if I put the D on there because that's something Larissa also told me. It is good to know, and I appreciate that. And that's the kind of thing we do. And there's a great example. It wasn't a question. That's true, Emma. That's a question that, or a way to address a microaggression. And thank you. I normally say transgender and not with the D because I've learned that from Larissa. And I totally apologize for that. And I will make sure to be conscious of that. And that's a great example, Emma. Thank you. That's how we correct things without making people feel bad, because we all need to learn. So thank you very much, Emma. Any other questions? I now am looking at the chat. I realized there was a lot here, and people are, it's a lot to take in and a lot to understand and a lot to do. So what I suggest is you pull up these slides with the link, go to RA for All or the link that Tam gave you, and make sure you try some of the things I suggested. Go to the links, look at your collections. I think the best place to start, though, is conversations with the rest of the staff at your library. There's another thing I don't have a way to put on this lecture, but one thing I learned I want to share if people are still on is when I went to PLA, and I wrote about it. If you go to my PLA reports, just use the tag PLA. It was probably the best program I went to at PLA. Actually, let me pull it up. Let's do that. It was done by a library. It's not letting me leave. There we go. Let me pull it up. Oop, it went to my GIF. Of course it did. I don't know why it's not letting me out of my talk. Escape. There we go. If I go to RA for All and I close this and I search, I'll show you how to do it. Sorry for making you all nauseous. If you go to PLA, it will bring them up backward in reverse chronological order. And I just want to make sure I don't misspeak since it's right here. It was the post on a deep dive into diverse books. So if you look at that, I did a whole Twitter stream on it. This is linked to this. So basically it was from the University of Central Florida's Diverse Families Bookshelf Database. Here is what I learned from this program. And again, if you just use that link, you can get all the information, but this was fascinating. Here's the thing I learned about diversity, a direct versus indirect diversity. I haven't figured out a way to work this into my talk yet, but indirect diversity happens in children's books, and there's examples, and I go through them, but here's the perfect example. They've been doing picture walks through all their picture books to get that indirect diversity in their catalogs talking about discovery. So how do they do that? Well, they had a book they showed, which if you looked at the catalog subheadings, all of it is like cats, dogs, new baby. It was a cat that was grumpy that a new baby was coming, and the cat was complaining to the dog, and they were sort of acting out the cats were not gendered, their feelings about the new baby. And nothing in it said that the book was diverse, right, in any way. But if you did a picture walk through this book, and it was the cat, obviously the cat and dog see themselves as the center of the story. So the people are shown not ever really fully, right, because our cats don't see us as full humans. But clearly the people were brown skinned, not white. It was two women, and they were having a baby shower, and they were bringing home a baby. That is indirect diversity. They showed another book of a little boy, a story of a little boy who, it was about his dreams and talking through his dreams. And we do a picture walk. The boy is brown skinned and he has parents. One is white and one is black. Nothing about it in the story. So there's something I've learned that I'm trying to incorporate too, especially when we're dealing with children and that indirect diversity. So.
There were no other questions. Does anyone have any questions? Don't be shy. We'll give it a couple more minutes.
And again, its recording is going to be available, right? Is it going to be on that Reaching Forward Fridays webpage, or where will it be?
You know what? We are working on getting the recordings up for everyone next week. So it's still to be determined. If you've got to just bear with us, but they will be up by Friday of next week. Definitely sooner, but by Friday at the latest.
And next Friday, you can see Jez, who was on this talk, doing her program, 20 programs for 20 and 30 somethings. And she'll be doing that next Friday at 1. And then you're going to keep going, right?
We hope so.
If you were supposed to present at Reaching Forward, email ILA and let them know that you were willing to do it for them. Because really, we're trying to get all the people who were supposed to be there, right? And make it in a Friday occurrence.
Well, yeah, that, and we did reach out to people for the ILA new network as well. So that's a shameless plug right there.
There you go.
If you haven't already, or if you don't know anything about that, that's learning 20 to 30 minute webinars with the Q&A as well. And we're recording those also. We have one coming up on Monday. They're on Mondays and Wednesdays at noon.
Awesome. And then also all of you are Illinois libraries. So Rails is offering a brand new for me on April 16th at 10 a.m. They are offering, and I'll have it on my blog on Monday, the link to register. It is free for anyone in the world to see. The recording will only be available to Rails libraries, but it is a brand new 90-minute horror readers advisory program, never before seen in America. 10 a.m. on April 16th. It was seen in Australia last month, but it's even changed since then. It's all brand new material that will be in my new book. So you should definitely check that out. And it's actually right around halfway to Halloween time anyway, so.
Okay, it looks like there's no one who wants to answer any more questions. So this concludes. Thank you so much, Becky. We greatly appreciate it. And we want to thank everyone else for attending. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to ILA or Becky, as she's been very generous in providing her contact information. So with that being said, I did include a link of her slides in the chat box, so please take a look at that. And again, they'll probably be emailed to you and definitely posted. So everyone, stay safe and have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thanks. You're all welcome. Bye.